When a leader battery is running at 10%, the whole team feels it. Morale drops, productivity dips, and people quit. Welcome to the Lead with Impact podcast, where we help leaders reset, recharge, and lead with clarity. I'm your host, Michael Dillard, retired U.S. diplomat turned global leadership strategist. On this show, we have a very special guest. Mr. Brad Henderson has 45 years of leadership experience, author of The Consistency Effect, a CEO and executive leader across 7 industries. Brad, welcome to the Lead with Impact podcast. How are you?
I'm awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate it. Well, this episode is special because we just got done talking about all leaders need a coach. But a lot of times, as we were talking, high-performing leaders, they don't take time to read. They don't take time to get a coach. But yet the greatest sports people out there, the greatest achievers like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Serena Williams, all the greats, they all have coaches. What do you say about that?
You just captured it perfectly. And that is that culturally, I think there's a belief that if you have a business coach, a leadership coach, that somehow you're lacking in skills and capabilities. And nothing could be further from the truth. The most informed business leaders, let alone the most informed professional athletes, have coaches not because they're not good at what they do, but because they want to get that extra 5 or 10% out of themselves. And they know that the only way to do that is to have some external assistance and support in helping them to identify the areas that are potential blind spots for them, identify the areas that are development opportunities for them, and to look at how they can maximize their strength and impact on the organization that they're leading.
Powerful. I was on your LinkedIn profile, and one of your latest posts talks about leaders needing to adapt to millennials. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the Gen Z organization is absolutely coming up and fast and furious, and the oldest are 28 years old now. And a lot of my colleagues in business like to complain about Gen Zs. They feel that they're entitled. They feel that they have unrealistic expectations around what work is like, and that demand instant feedback, that they want to move corporations onto their collaboration platform of choice. And it's easy for a leader to just dismiss that as a generational entitlement. And what I've tried to argue is that that is a mistake. What these people are showing you is how to compete and how to dominate your industry in 2030 and 2035. So rather than looking at this and dismissing it simply as different from our generation or the generation of leaders that are leading them, look at it as a roadmap for how you need to develop your organization and how you need to develop the leadership so that when these people are in charge, that the corporations and the companies that you're leading today will continue to thrive and survive.
Wonderful. So that leads me to another question is, how much does poor leadership cost an organization?
Yeah, I think it's an enormous cost, because the leader, if nothing else, is the embodiment and the keeper of the culture of the organization. And if that person is lacking in articulating what that culture is in the organization, the impact is almost immeasurable, if you like, because as you set the stage for what the organization is about and how everyone can participate in the goals and the mission of the organization, if that is not set correctly, then you're going to become a repellent of talent rather than a magnet for talent. And if you're not inclusive in how you work with people, again, you're going to repel the exact talent that is going to help you to go to the next generation. And let me just say that a lot of the times leaders have gotten to their role because they have been extremely good at what they did. They were the subject matter experts in what they did. But as you climb the leadership ladder, you become responsible for multiple different areas within an organization. And your subject matter expertise becomes less important to your role and to your success, then your conversion from the subject matter expert to the chief questioner in
Yeah, I
charge.
like that.
Because, if you get to the point where you're running finance, marketing, sales, operations, engineering, all of the different disciplines in the organization, it's virtually impossible to be the subject matter expert in all of those areas. But what you can do is be the orchestra leader in bringing all of the subject matter experts together. And rather than trying to be the smartest person in the room, make sure that you're developing the room where the smartest people want to come and want to participate and where the smartest answers will emerge very naturally.
I love that because that dives into my lead with the impact framework, where D stands for develop other leaders. Because as you know, Brad, employees are an organization's most valued asset. And if a leader is not developing the assets for the company, then that means that the company is going to fall. How many times have you seen that happen where you see this general manager, you see the district manager, you see the supervisor who's great, but if you look underneath, you peel back the layers, you see that the team hasn't been developed. How has that impact organizations that you've seen or heard about?
One of my favorite expressions or models, if you like, is that you're not really a phenomenal leader until your mentee's mentee is developing his or her mentee. And so the nature of that is that your leadership has not only affected your next level, your direct reports, but it has cascaded down into the organization as far as possible, where everyone is a leader developing other leaders and continuing to cascade that down into the organization.
Right. I know you like to talk about burnout. On your website, you have it under personality profile there. And then you are the author of The Consistency Effect. Can you elaborate a little bit about how does burnout affect high performing leaders?
Yeah, and then, again, I think it comes back in some respects to culture. And in the book, The Consistency Effect, I use a baseball metaphor to kind of capture the thinking here. When I was asked to encapsulate my success over the years, I always described it in baseball terms as being someone that hit singles and doubles, not
Okay.
someone that hit grand slam home runs. And the difference there is that if you developed the next world changing idea, if your company rocketed from the garage to a Fortune 500, if you became an overnight billionaire, those are grand slam home runs. And for the
Hmm.
most part, that is not everyone's experience of success or business. But if that's the model, if that's the yardstick against which everyone is measured, then there is incredibly high expectations for executives to be hitting those or swinging for those grand slams. And that is what propels people to work an inordinate number of hours. We talk about the new 996 culture, working 9 a.m. till 9 p.m., 6 days a week.
Hmm.
It's 70 plus hours a week. And it's not sustainable. Some people will say, well, that's what you need to do to be a startup. Others will argue that at a certain point in time, there's diminishing returns to the amount of energy and effort that you put into an organization. So what it really speaks to is trying to make sure that you consciously understand what you're doing and that consistency through trying to hit singles and doubles in business as well as in baseball is going to win more series, more games, more series, and ultimately build more careers than people that are always swinging for the fences.
I love it because it's like the compound effect. Anybody who invests know that, constant, consistent returns, time in the market. Warren Buffett talks about it all the time. Investing in the S&P 500 is a billionaire, but he also understands for most people, the easiest thing for them to do is to keep it simple, which is diversify, invest in the 500 best performing US stocks and keep it at that, trying to focus on that winner, like all these other great investors, they have all that time, right, to study and spend. another part of it, Warren Buffett has bet a lot of famous investors that can they really beat the S&P 500 over 10-year period of time, and a lot of these investors end up failing. Which kind of shows you keep it simple. Singles and doubles is how you win the game.
Yeah, it's an excellent metaphor, Michael, and I hadn't really thought about it that way, but you're absolutely right. And one of Warren Buffett's other favorite terms is that it is time in the market, not market timing, that
Mhm.
makes the difference. And that is around consistency and the consistency of investing. And he'll be the first one to say that he has not always bought stocks at the bottom, and nor has he always sold stocks at the top. But when he has made those trades, he has recognized that they were good value, and he has done that on a persistent and consistent basis.
That is so true. When you go and look at like Warren Buffett's dividend that he gets from Coca-Cola, oh my goodness, that is time in the market for sure. For us, for the new leaders out there, what's a tip that they can glean from reading your book?
I think there's a lot of elements in the book that are very helpful for first-time leaders or emerging leaders. One of the ones that I think is most important is having an identity outside of your work. I am guilty of it, certainly was guilty of it in the first number of years of my life, where everything I did was wrapped up in my job. And when I was fired from that job, I had an existential identity crisis because I didn't know who I was. I was my job, I was my role, and I was involved at a time that young people won't even understand, where people didn't have personal cell phones, they didn't have personal emails, they were corporate entities. And so
Yeah.
not only did I lose my identity, I lost my entire digital presence, if you like. And what that experience taught me was that you need to be diversified, like the portfolio that we talked about, to have an equal amount of time invested, or a reasonable amount of time invested in your family and things outside of your business. Because if your friends and your family and everything is invested in your business and that goes away, then what have you got left? What are the assets that you've got left? And so many people are deferring happiness for some future event. I will take time for myself. I will take time for my family when I make certain amount of money, when I get this promotion, when my company achieves this particular milestone. And the fallacy in all of that is that many times as we achieve those things, we automatically move the goalposts and we say, okay, well, I achieved that financial goal, but now I want to achieve this industry goal. And now I've achieved that goal. Now I want to move this. And so that tomorrow, that time that we're deferring our happiness keeps getting pushed off because we are the ones who reset that goal. So rather than seeing happiness and fulfillment as a prize that you get after so many years of work, see it as something that you can enjoy while you're getting all of those things. It's a very subtle difference, but it's an important difference because too many times I've seen people destroy family relationships, alienate friends, abandon other goals that they may have outside of their business because they become all too consumed with their business.
Definitely, definitely. As a U.S. diplomat, our promotions are very, very, very competitive. Fortunately, I was able to rise quickly amongst the foreign service realm. And then there's another division, which is called senior foreign service. And people were asking me, Michael, are you going to go senior foreign service? And I said, nah, I'm fine. I'm going to stay where I'm at. And people were shocked. But like you said, Brad, what I realize is that as a leader, as you start competing and you're leading at the top, you're always trying to get the next project done. You have to start to look behind you and say, how is it impacting your family? What life do you have outside of work? And I started to focus on my kids, my family, because they were getting older and I wanted to have more experiences with them.
And part of the perspective of the Gen Z group is that they saw their parents sacrifice family time and family dinners and sporting events and all the things that were important to them along the way, and only to be terminated or even to retire and not have a fulfilled life. And so their perspective is shaped by that earlier generation, my generation, other generations, and their experience with that. For them to want and have more work-life integration, more boundaries between their personal life and their business or corporate life is a natural reaction to the experience that they have.
Wonderful. Let's talk about empowerment. Now, you have so many years of experience, 45 years of leadership experience, and I can't let you go without sharing with the leaders who think they're performing at a high level, but their team, they're saying otherwise. The team morale is low. People don't like to come into work. They don't quite like the boss because the boss isn't empowering the team. What's the best way a struggling leader can empower the team?
I think it gets back to the point we talked about earlier, which is moving from the subject matter expert to the chief questioner. And that is that all too often I see leaders who feel that it's their responsibility to have all the answers. And so even if they're not the subject matter experts, they feel compelled to proffer an opinion or a suggestion. And what happens with an organization is that they will quickly align to the leader's paradigm, if you like, their processes. So if you're the one who has all the answers, you will in fact create a passive dependent relationship with your employees because they'll wait until you offer your opinion before they offer theirs. And if you're a very strong individual, which most times leaders are, they won't question your opinion. And if worse, if they make a decision and it doesn't align with your opinion and you chastise them for that decision, again, they learn that a passive dependent relationship is exactly the way to focus it. If you turn that 180 degrees around and ask more questions than statements and become a master at asking questions that help the people that work for you on their journey to um, to discover for themselves what it is that you're trying to help them understand, then there will be a level of understanding and a level of commitment that will turn the amount of effort that they put in around almost 180 degrees. It'll go from doing the minimum to doing the maximum. And again, the real challenge here is that people have a certain amount of effort that they put in place every day. And if you ask somebody who's very busy, if they have time to do something that they don't really want to do, they'll tell you how busy they are. They'll tell you all of the things that they need to do. Funnily enough, if you ask somebody who's incredibly busy to do something that they really want to do, or that they feel is somehow going to enhance their skills, capabilities, or development, all of
Mhm.
a sudden they have an incredible amount of effort to be able to put into that initiative. And I call that discretionary effort.
I
Something
like
that
that.
their discretion to put that effort in is what the difference is. So if you're working with a team and they're putting in 100% of call it non-discretionary effort and 0% of discretionary effort, you're getting a certain amount of productivity out of them. If you're working with a team that's putting in that same amount of non-discretionary effort, but they're putting in 5, 10, 15, 20% more time and energy because it's discretionary effort, they're excited, they're on fire, they want to do this, they see how it's contributing not only to the corporate goal, but to their own personal goals, your organization will turn around from being performing to being super.
I love that discretionary effort. It is so true because if they don't want to do that task, they're like, "Oh no, I got to do this, I got to do that." But if it's something that they think that will give them a promotion or give them more visibility or something that they have a passion for, they will come up with a way to delegate their work to somebody else so that they can take care of that project that you gave them, and et cetera. I love that analogy. And I do see it all the time from a different perspective when a leader will give a project to someone and then a week later the project is not done and the leader is upset. And immediately in my mind, I come back to, well, one, did you train the employee? A lot of times, new employees are put into the workforce because of their technical knowledge, but they don't know how to do it according to your company's rules, your standards. And then, as you know, Brad, from working so many years, there's a organizational culture, unwritten rules of how you do it, how you format certain things that you complete. And if that employee hasn't been exposed to your culture, they're not going to get it right the first time. So you're setting them up for failure. I always say, get somebody that has a professional proficiency in the work, at least a 7, and they're motivated on the scale of 1 to 10 of at least a 7. That is the person that you can definitely delegate tasks to. You can empower them to take on more responsibilities. But the others who score lower, where you're going to have to spend more time training them or figuring out things that's going to motivate them to want to take on more responsibility. What say you?
Yeah, I totally agree. I often talk about the fact that, if you want to go to the Olympics, you have to have Olympians. It sounds like a very self-evident statement, but it's shocking how many times business people go to the Olympics, which is their business every day, with people who are not Olympians. And so part of it is that you can develop people with great talent and capabilities and develop them into Olympians. You can bring Olympians on board, but you also need to be a very shrewd assessor of talent and be able to understand when people are performing at the level you expect and when they're not. And if they're not, to dive into it. And what a lot of the times I find leaders doing is shaming people. So that project that you talked about that isn't performing at the end of a week, they say, Michael, this is not good enough. You're not good enough. This is unacceptable behavior, unacceptable results. You know, do better,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which doesn't help, right? Whereas an approach where we sit down and we say, Michael, that we were expecting the results to look more like this week. Is that your understanding? Yes, that's my understanding. Well, can you help me to understand your thinking? Because I need to understand that. What was your thinking through the last week in terms of this project? Because until you really understand what that person was thinking, you really can't help them on their journey of delivering results, because maybe in that process, they had 10 forest fires that they needed to deal with, which you would have agreed that they should have tended that time to. But maybe you're going to coach them to say, when that happens, Michael, please just raise your hand and say, hey, I'm not going to deliver on this project because I got these 10 forest fires I've got to put out.
Yep.
Maybe they have a limiting belief around what's possible for the project. Then you can address that and deal with that. Maybe they don't want to do this project, and you can deal with that and address with that. But a lot of the times our reaction is simply, you didn't deliver the results. That's unacceptable. You're a terrible person. Do better. And so it doesn't inspire that person. It doesn't release that discretionary effort that we talked about. And that person doesn't become better. They don't become an Olympian.
That is true. That analogy of an Olympian is powerful. And it makes me pause to think that leaders, if you have a team, what are you really doing for your team? Because if you're empowering your team, you're developing your team to be the best in the industry, y'all will be unstoppable. I mean, that's just a powerful analogy that are you really training and developing Olympians on your team? What other nuggets do you have, Brad? I love it.
Well, just following along on that, there's really two schools of thought. Rockefeller once said that the true sign of leaders is the ability to get ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And that is a wonderful aspiration if you're in leadership, and particularly if you're passionate about trying to help and develop other people. But there's another school of thought that was made popular by a guy by the name of Jim Rohn, who was one of Tony Robbins' early influences. And he said, be in the behavioral attraction business. Don't be in the behavioral management business. So hire people who can do what it is that you need to have done, and give them the platform for them to be to be able to perform. So leaders are sitting there and they're listening to these two almost contradictory approaches, and they're saying, so what do I do?
Mhm.
How do I lead? Do I hire people, or do I fire everybody that's not good and just hire people that are really good? Or do I develop people? What do I do? And the truth, like so many different things in leadership, is in the gray area, which is in the middle. And sometimes you're going to develop people, and sometimes you are going to bring in people. And sometimes you're going to have to exit people because they either don't get it, don't want to get it, don't agree with how you intend to run your business. And those people have to go because otherwise they become a carcinogen in your organization. So the true test of leadership, the true inspiration for leadership, if you like, is to be that orchestra leader, to be that Olympic coach who recognizes the raw talent in individuals that can be developed, recognizes when raw talent needs to be brought in, and then also recognizes when certain individuals on the team are likely going to be more successful somewhere else and need to
Mhm.
be moved on from your organization.
All right. Last topic before we conclude and get your last words of wisdom, micromanagement. What do you think about that?
It's again, it's one of those gray areas because as leaders who are subject matter experts who have done the role, typically what we do is we take the best subject matter expert, the best doer, and we make that person a manager without giving them the skills, capabilities, and education on how to do it. And so they tend to want to micromanage the people, and in some cases, they want to just push them away and actually do the job themselves, which is equally bad. And those things create that passive dependent relationship we talked about earlier. The people underneath them don't develop because they're just going to wait until the leader makes offers an opinion or does the activity themselves and not develop naturally underneath that leader. The real awareness that the leader needs to have is moving from micromanaging to outcome management and to helping to inspire the employees that work with them to develop and become the best version of themselves. Now, delegation in that model doesn't mean that you forget about it. In other words, you don't delegate and forget. You need to follow up with those people, but you need to do it in a way where you're not doing the job for them. You're not depriving them of thinking. As a matter of fact, you're forcing them to think through what needs to be done and you're forcing them to think through the consequences. And there's an accountability there, which helps them with their need and desire to make sure that the outcome happens. One of the challenges that a lot of leaders have about delegation is that they feel that their employees won't do what they need them to do unless they're on them 24/7. So, the equal part of that change is to set in place a system, a process where you can inspect the results that you've delegated to the employee, but not have that employee, not deprive that employee from the experience of learning and developing along the way.
So true, so true. Brad, if you could leave one final thought for leaders listening right now who want to lead with impact, what would that be?
One of my favorite expressions comes from Eleanor Roosevelt, and that is that learn from other people's mistakes because you can't live long enough to make them all yourself. And that really was the inspiration of my book, was to try and take all of the things that I made as mistakes and the things that worked out as well, and put them in the book to be a platform, be a springboard for the conversation around how leaders can develop more quickly than I developed, go through some of the problems that I went through, either with more clarity or more speed or both, and to become the leader that I think their organization needs and deserves, and hopefully the leader that they want to be.
Wonderful. Do you have a copy of your book, The Consistency Effect, nearby so people can see a picture of it?
There we go. It's available on Amazon in any country that you happen to be in, and would love for you to have it. Anybody that is interested in reaching out to me personally, my website is called the Consistency Edge, so consistency-edge.com. And I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so please follow me and subscribe to my newsletter because a lot of the things we've talked about today are the things that I blog about quite frequently.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, Brad, thank you so much for the nuggets, the words of wisdom. Leaders, what I hope you take away from today is that burnout is not a badge of honor. It is a warning sign. Your battery doesn't have to hit zero before you recharge. Take those micro breaks. Make sure you're listening. Make sure you're empowering others. You're adapting and you're developing future leaders. If you're ready to reset, you can go to michaeldillardspeaks.com. You can connect with me. Make sure, as you were listening to Brad, he said follow him on LinkedIn. He has some resources and tools available for you. He has a newsletter that is very informational. He is a coach of leaders who want to perform at the highest level. Until next time, keep listening, keep empowering, keep adapting, and keep developing. That's our time. Thanks, Brad.